April 12, 1861. Confederate forces fire the first shot of the Civil War on Fort Sumter in the harbor of Charleston, South Carolina. It was a bloodless opening to what would become the bloodiest war in our nation's history. It would be 4 years before the Stars and Stripes would fly again over that fort. From Mississippi to Maryland, the Civil War was fought in cornfields to peach orchards and in the forests and along the rivers in between. Millions of American men, veterans of both the blue and the gray, millions of individual war experiences that over the last 150 years helped to create the fabric of our country and even the legacy of Walnut Creek. Henry Hill was born in 1818 in Newton, Connecticut. He first enlisted in the Army in New Orleans in 1839 to serve in the Seminole War. He was discharged in 1844. Hill moved to Chicago in 1848. When the Civil War broke out in 1861, he re-enlisted.
I enlisted in the 47th Illinois Volunteers at Peoria, and my company was ordered to Benton Barracks, St. Louis, then on to Jefferson City, Missouri. I was appointed Ordnance Sergeant, having charge of the arms and the ammunition of the regiment. In February of 1862, snow, sleet, and rain made camp conditions about as bad as they could be. Plenty of rail fences were at hand, however, and the soldier boys kept good fires going outside the tents. I was confined to my tent by sickness, where no fires could be kept, and where I slept in gun boxes so as to sleep up off the wet ground.
Don Frazier of Oakville, Illinois, was just 17 in 1862. At a war meeting at the Oakville schoolhouse, Frazier rose and spoke to the crowd that had gathered.
I intend to enlist, but I don't want it generally known in case the rebels, hearing of my coming, might quit and go for home before I get there.
Following his enlistment, Frazier served in Company 1 of the 92nd Illinois Infantry. Whether you wore a blue uniform or a gray uniform, conditions were harsh. John C. Steptoe was a private in the 72nd Pennsylvania Volunteer Infantry. On September 25, 1862, 1 week after the Battle of Antietam, the bloodiest one-day battle of the Civil War, he wrote to his sister.
I came out of the late battle safe and sound. The battle was fought on Wednesday. It was the hottest place I've been in for some time, and hotter than I want to be in again. After the battle was over, the field presented a scene that I never wish to behold again. The dead and dying appeared to be everywhere. Their moans could be heard above the roaring of the cannons and rattling of the musketry. We finished burying the dead on Sunday and marched here at Harper's Ferry on Monday. We now occupy all the heights around this God-forsaken town, and I think our camp may be called Camp Misery 3 miles from the knowledge of God.
Thomas Shields was 28 years old when he enlisted in Company D, 3rd South Carolina. During his service, he wrote 31 letters to his wife. Throughout these letters, Shields reveals that despite the hardships and dangers of life on the battlefield, his focus was on the situation at home.
We are just lying here in the woods near Culpeper. I have no guess how long we will stay here. We may stay here a week or two, or we may leave here before night. I'm glad to hear that the wheat looks so well, and if it comes good, I want you to be sure and save it. Let it cost what it may if you can get anybody to cut it for you. I'm glad to hear that the corn looks so well. I'm sorry to hear about the old cow being on the lift. I am afraid she will die. You wrote to me that the chimney had fell down and that you know what you must do about it. I want to know how the well is doing, whether there is water in plenty or not, and whether it is good or not, and whether you have got any other bucket yet or not. I shall get home sometime to help you enjoy the good things of home, for I tell you, they are good when they're compared to what I have had to encounter here. If I ever get home, I shall know how to appreciate it.
Many soldiers exhibited a grim understanding of their fate on the field of battle. Charles Reddington Mudge was just graduated from Harvard University when the war broke out. He joined the 2nd Massachusetts Infantry, also known as the Harvard Brigade, as a first lieutenant. He was later promoted to captain, and by July of 1863, at the Battle of Gettysburg, he had been promoted to lieutenant colonel. At Gettysburg, the 2nd Massachusetts Infantry made an assault upon the Confederate troops at the base of Culp's Hill. Lieutenant Colonel Mudge was ordered to launch an attack on the morning of July 3rd. Lieutenant Colonel Mudge, understanding the suicidal nature of the assault, simply said,
"It is murder, but it is in order."
Mudge died leading the charge and was among the 51,000 casualties at the Battle of Gettysburg. To this day, Gettysburg is the bloodiest single battle ever fought on American soil. Many spent months or years in prison far from home. Captain Godwin Scudamore of Company A, 80th Illinois Volunteers, was fighting near Rome, Georgia in May of 1863 when he surrendered to Confederate troops. He was transported to Richmond, Virginia, where he spent more than 8 months in Libby Prison.
I made my escape from Libby Prison February 9th, 1864, through the tunnel the prisoners had dug under the street. I walked deliberately through the streets of Richmond, taking care to keep away from the guards. I got into a road and thought I heard a cavalryman coming and jumped over a fence and lay in a ravine all day. It was so cold that icicles froze all over me. I traveled as hard as I could at night, hid in the brush during the day. Both my legs gave out, so I could not move. Heard some men chopping wood. I thought if they were Negroes, I would be all right. I crawled out. One of the Negroes told me to go and hide away till night, and he would come and take care of me. That night, he came and took me to his cabin and kept me there for 7 days before I could walk.
The man stayed with Scudamore for more than 12 days, hiding with him during the day in Negro quarters of various Richmond homes and plantations, avoiding Confederate troops, and eventually helping him across the Rapidan River and back to Union pickets. By 1864, hundreds of thousands had been lost to war. Gettysburg, Chickamauga, Antietam, Chancellorsville, Manassas, Shiloh, more men were needed. Adam Isley was underage when he enlisted in the 1st Pennsylvania Cavalry, Company E, in February 1864. His father didn't want him to enlist, so to avoid being found, he enlisted under the name Charles Young, a name he would keep until his 65th birthday, when the government required him to go back to his legal name in order to collect his Army pension. Within a month of enlisting, Isley was marching south with thousands of other fresh troops.
The first time I ever saw President Lincoln was in March 1864. President Lincoln had issued an order for 300,000 men, and they were gathering at all recruiting stations throughout the North to be taken down to Grant's, Sherman's, and Sheridan's armies. Our contingent was on the way to Grant's army located south of Alexandria, Virginia. As we passed through Washington, Mr. Lincoln came out on the balcony to watch us. When we saw him, we began to sing, "We are coming, Father Abraham." He took off his hat and bowed. "We are coming, Father Abraham, 300,000 more. From Mississippi's winding stream and from New England's shore. We leave our plows and workshops, our wives and children dear.
Father Abram, 300,000 more. From Mississippi's winding stream and from from New England's shore. We'll
Not all who served the nation did so as soldiers. Many worked in hospitals, including women. Others provided assistance and relief. Samuel H. Weller was a chaplain of sorts who spent 6 weeks in early 1865 as a volunteer for the U.S. Christian Commission in Memphis, Tennessee, tending to soldiers who needed comfort. At the end of his 6 weeks, he wrote in his journal,
An interesting chapter in our life history closes today. For a brief season, our sympathies, our prayers, our efforts have been given to our country. We go from them today. We bear with us our trust, the spirit of a pure patriotism and a firm devotion in him, in whose name and for whose honor this noble commission has been instituted.
When Weller returned from Memphis to his home, the United States had been at war for nearly 4 years. Some 200,000 men were still on the battlefield, including Charlie Young.
In March of 1865, we broke winter quarters starting right after the enemy. Now, from that time on until the 9th of April, we fought every day. On the morning of the 9th, we were taken to the front. We opened fight for about an hour when the 9th Corps relieved us. They made one charge on the Confederates when the white flag began to fly on the Confederate side, and all firing ceased. A Confederate came riding out from the timber and asked for General Grant. An officer took him to Grant. It was not long before the Confederate officer came back and passed through our lines into his own. In a few minutes, General Lee and one of his staff came riding out and went to the McLean house and met General Grant. And there, General Lee surrendered himself and his army to Grant.